Mahoney, and I'm currently a vice principal in the York Region District School Board. Prior to that, I was a special education consultant for the board, and I've spent pretty much most of my career in education working with students with a variety of different needs. And I'm also a parent of a student in grade 12 now who has a learning disability. So a little about me.
That's great, and we're so thrilled to partner with you, Karen. And Karen and I have actually done this presentation a couple of times to families, and we always take the opportunity to sort of ask around, if you're comfortable, to let us know in the chat what age your child is or what grade they're going into, and that might just help us answer some of the questions to that particular group. So if that's something you're comfortable with, if you just add that comment in the chat about what grade your child's in, that would really be helpful for us to see if we're mostly dealing with some younger kids going into JK or those early years, or even transition to high school or transition out, which I can't believe, Karen, you're heading part of life, which is crazy. Thank you to everyone who's posting that. So the first two that we hear, so we've got a couple turning 4, so this is getting into JK, which is exciting and a little nerve-wracking. Someone in grade 6, we have a little SKer, and a grade 1, and then another in JK. So a lot of JK or almost JK parents. So this will be sort of really interesting. I love how parents, and we've done these presentations, a version of special education workshops with parents, and I am always so impressed with parents wanting to know everything well before it happens. And so I want to congratulate all of the parents on here who are just adding more tools to their toolkit and learning more about what they might experience in the future. And I know, we talked about this when we were sort of practicing this webinar, that sometimes you hear those negative stories, whether it's online or with your friends or out for coffee or, in your Facebook groups. And, what we've tried to do is really share some positive stories with collaborating with the school board. And that's why it's so great that Karen and CTN, myself, and parent mentors have worked together. That just shows that partnership is really valuable and can be something really positive when we work together. And we have some tips and tricks for that too, that have worked for the parents on the panel, and things that have helped for my own success with my son as well. So I have a son who is in grade 7 right now, so I'm already a little panicked about high school. He has ADHD and a learning disability, so he's on an IEP. He does spend some time in the student support center in the mornings, and so that's my perspective as a parent as well. And our mentors will sort of explain a little bit more about that. I think we will I'm trying to see how many, we've got 22 people on, which is fantastic. So while we're waiting for another 1 or 2 people to join, maybe I'll introduce our mentors and just have a quick intro. Amy, can you introduce yourself? Amy is one of our parent mentors, and she's joining us to share some of her perspective. Just a quick bio, Amy, of maybe your experience with the school board, a little bit about your child.
Hi guys, my name is Amy Pruchnicki, and I have a son that's in grade 6 who has multiple and very global complex needs, from in a wheelchair with mobility issues, doesn't speak well, but uses an iPad for communication, and a whole host of fabulous challenges. We've had to meet that we have great support systems and great relationships all the way from our principals. I guess my big wins are about communication, and I think that's really
awesome. Amy, you're cutting out a little bit.
I can add some value as how to accommodate. Okay.
I don't know,
so it's really about accommodation.
Even freezing a little bit. My trick is opening the door.
Anyways.
That's what my kids do for the Wi-Fi when they can't play. Okay, so
so if you me, it's really about communication and accommodation.
There we go. Awesome. That's great. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time and the expertise that you can add to our discussion. We also have Patty Rivard, who's on as well. And Patty actually is a teacher as well as a parent. So she has two hats as well, just like Karen. So Patty, can you tell us just a little bit about your experience as a parent?
Yeah. So I have a son who just transitioned into high school this past September, which has gone famously. And he's been in the York Region District School Board since grade 1. And I attest to what Amelia said. It's all about communication, and when you can just partner with the teacher on everything that your hopes and dreams for your children. It's not the teacher's job to fulfill all of those hopes and dreams, but definitely the communication has been very, very good with the teachers that we have had. And, and I've been very diligent of being a partner to the teacher. My son has Down syndrome and was diagnosed with autism when he was 4. So he's nonverbal, uses a communication device, low tone from the Down syndrome. He's, fine motor is a challenge, gross motor is a challenge. I mean, he walks and he, maneuvers well now, but that's been through lots of processes and lots of therapies, et cetera. We've had a really positive experience, I have to say, throughout our school journey, and a very positive transition to high school as well.
Yay!
It's really good. Really.
That's such good news. I'm excited about that, Patty. I'm going to be watching you guys very closely. So I am going to turn the floor over to Karen. And Karen, again, thanks for joining us. And one of the things that we do in our program at CTN with our Family Resource Program is collaborate with our partners in the community, partner agencies, clinicians, teachers, even the ministry, and deliver some of this information so that we can have both perspectives, the parent and the expert. And we hope that you enjoy the webinar tonight. And again, use the chat for any questions, and I'll be checking that as well. So over to you, Karen.
Okay, so we're going to start today by talking about, of course, my slideshow's not advancing. I wonder why that's happening. Oh, I'll try with this different
so fancy.
Instead of the cursor, just to make it harder for me. So just some things that we're going to do tonight. We're just going to go through the, I talk about the Identification, Placement, and Review Committee, further develop our understanding of that, along with the categories of exceptionalities and placement options. Then we're going to talk about the individual education plan and what are key look-fors for parents, and then talk finally about homeschool collaboration and how to develop those skills. Okay, it's not going to let me use my cursors. Well, okay, so we're going to talk about the IPRC. So in education, we love all these little acronyms. So always make sure that you feel able to ask if people are talking about using letters and acronyms you understand. That's really important. So the Identification, Placement, and Review Committee is actually a meeting. So it's a group of people or a committee that comes together and they talk about identification and placement of a student. So this slide talks about how that it's kind of misused as a verb, but it's actually a meeting that takes place where, and it's a critical meeting where we talk about how are students going to be identified and what type of service or placement are they going to get to meet their needs. Okay. So when you go to an IPRC, and every school board does this differently, so I think it's important to understand that different school boards have different criteria for when they decide to have an IPRC meeting. And in the York Region District School Board, we usually only have an IPRC if we have assessment. So some type of diagnosis or report from a regulated health professional, some type of medical health professional, speech and language pathologist, psychologist, and it's at that point, so that assessment's already been looked at by professionals within our school board, and so you have this meeting to determine whether or not a child is identified as exceptional. We talk about what that exceptionality is, and we determine placement. So what level of services is that child going to get in the school? And every year, once your child's been IPRC, there has to be at least one IPRC meeting, okay? It's freaking me out that the screen's not moving the way I want it to, just so you know. So the ministry actually outlines the categories on which we can use in an IPRC. So the board doesn't make them up, the ministry makes them up. They're listed here on your screen. And you'll notice that there's a lot of things that can fall under one category. So behavior, for example, a child could be have that exceptionality if they have an anxiety diagnosis, if they have ADHD, if they have ODD. So there's different diagnoses that can fall under one category. And these will be explained to you at the IPRC and hopefully before you go to the IPRC. And the category in blue, multiple exceptionalities, we do have some students that have a physical disability as well as another diagnosis. So they would be multiple exceptionalities. And at the IPRC, if your child has more than one diagnosis, they can be listed within that as well.
So I do want to say just one thing. Sometimes and I've heard this with families, that a child who has autism and a learning disability, they would possibly put that into behavior and communication, which would be a multiple exceptionality. My son with ADHD was labeled with multiple in the behavior for the ADHD and the learning disability and communication. And I remember being new to this as a parent back then in grade 3, and that word behavior really got me a little bit upset because it wasn't that he had poor behavior. It sort of has a negative meaning to it. That really bothered me. I had to get over my own sort of worries about that. And it was explained really well by the team. And it was just like, yeah, it was pretty awesome. The principal, I remember her saying to me, yeah, it's not our favorite word either, but this is what the ministry gives us. And this is where we put ADHD so that we make sure that we identify him as having multiple exceptionalities. So, I know I personally got hung up on a word and there are emotions when it comes to any labels for our children. And this is just another example of sometimes we don't love the language, but it does help to identify them to help with that need assessment and with that placement. And it certainly did. The outcome for my son was, really positive in making sure we could label both areas of his struggles.
For sure. Okay, so it's really important when you go to the IPRC. So if you're going to go to an IPRC meeting, and my recommendation to families is that you always try and attend an IPRC if you're able, and that you feel comfortable. So what's probably going to happen is you're going to get a letter of invitation from the school to that meeting, and they're going to give you a time. And I think it's important that you feel comfortable enough to be able to have a person at the school you're communicating with so that you can talk about a time that works for you. I mean, obviously it's going to be, it can't be at 7 o'clock at night, but my son's school knows that I work, so they try and do his IPRC first thing in the morning so that I can go and not have to miss a full day of work. So, because they know I want to be there, and so they're trying to accommodate my schedule because I said to them, I want to come, but I can't come at 11, right? So could mine be the first one, that type of thing. And so we kind of work towards that because some people will tell you that the IPRC meeting is about paperwork, but it's actually an opportunity for you to talk about your child's programming and what their service delivery model is going to look like. So my recommendation to parents is that you always go. And then I like students to go once they're older, especially when they have their IPRC for going from grade 8 to grade 9. Because it enables them to meet the high school folk and get to know some people. So when you're going through the IPRC process, they're going to talk about placement options. And placement options are critical because they really outline the level of support your child's going to get in the school system. And we know that the IPRC process is legally binding, just like the individual education plan that we talk about later is a legal document. So this is kind of where, if you need to advocate for your child, it's important that you understand how much service has the IPRC dictated that they're going to get within the school system. So we have what we call indirect service. So indirect service would be the child's in the regular classroom and they're getting consultation. So the CERT is consulting with the classroom teacher about the student, providing strategies and suggestions, but the special education teacher is not actually going into their class and giving them any direct support, okay? And the way that placement options work is we try to give children the amount of service obviously that matches their needs, but we don't want to over service them, right? So if a child's newly identified with a learning disability, I might not jump right to partially integrated. I want to see what's the best level of service that I can give them. So after indirect service, we would have resource assistance. That's where the child's in the regular integrated classroom and they get the CERT, the special education resource teacher, comes into the classroom and supports them, and they might support them in small groups. So it doesn't necessarily mean one-on-one. It means that they're in that classroom as a second teacher and supporting probably that one student that's identified, but probably a number of identified students in that classroom. And they often do guided reading groups. They help kids review and monitor their assignments. For our little kids, they might run like little booster reading groups, that type of thing. So the child's in the regular classroom and the CERT comes in. And the CERT might only come in for 2 or 3 periods a week. So it will depend on the model and the staffing that the school has, how much resource support is available to go into your child's classroom, which is why I think it's important that you ask that question at the IPRC meeting. So what does resource support look like? So for my son, when he went to grade 9 and grade 10, so in grade 10, it just looked like 1 period a week, he connected with his resource teacher. They came into one of his classes once a week, right? So we want to make sure that we know that. So we're not thinking, oh, they're going to see someone every day if they have resource support, because that might not be the case. The next level will be withdrawal assistance, and that's where they come out of the regular classroom into a special education placement, and usually it's for one subject, for math or for language. They actually get withdrawn usually into the Student Support Center for that subject. If we go up to partially integrated, that's where they're having 51% of their day in a special education classroom, usually a student support center, where they get math and language. And in our board, the other option would be a community class. So both a community class placement and a student support center placement fall under partially integrated. So it's important that as a parent, you know when you're identifying your child partially integrated, what does that look like? In really the only fully contained programs, I think, in our province at the time are usually our provincial schools. So the York Region District School Board offers no fully self-contained classes, but we do have some students that may go to Trillium, for example, which is a provincial school, and that would be an example of a self-contained class. The kids actually go there on board.
So we have a couple of questions, Karen. First,
sure, yeah.
I think it's just relevant because they are all about IPRC.
Yeah.
I do want to explain what happened in my situation with my son. Originally, when he was first identified, I thought that resource assistance was going to be perfect for him. He needed some help in math and literacy. And I thought, okay, assistance sounds great. Someone's going to come into the classroom and help him during math and English. That sounds great to me. Well, of course, I didn't ask the right questions at that time. And the woman who was the CERT, the special education resource teacher, at the time had her own class in the morning when my son was doing math and English. So she had her own class in the mornings, and then she would come and see my son in the afternoon. And in the afternoon, he had art and gym and music, maybe science. And it wasn't during the times he really needed it. So he was still really struggling. So we did actually ask for another IPRC. And that was after a lot of dialogue with both the teacher and the CERT to say, how can we get him some more support? And they recommended we do the withdrawal assistance, which meant that he would actually be in the CERT's class in the morning for math, and then the rest of the day, when it was better for him and easier for him to be successful with less support, that he was in the regular classroom integrated with his peers. And to this day in grade 7, so he started that in grade 4, so for 3 years, that's how his schoolwork has been. He's been in another class for math and then back in his regular classroom. And that really provides him with exactly the support he needs during math period in particular. And even with the Rotary in grade 7, they find a way to make that work really well. So Karen, I am just going to mention a couple of questions. So
Sure.
A lot of our parents of young little ones asked if children going into kindergarten would have an IPRC, and who initiates the scheduling for those young kids going into JK. So when will it happen and who initiates?
Okay, so if a child comes into kindergarten, and once again, not all school boards are the same. So some school boards don't even really IPRC any students because they don't have the same resources that we would have in York Region to do that. But for what generally happens in our board, if a student comes into kindergarten with a diagnosis, so let's say they have a diagnosis of autism or they have a diagnosis of a developmental disability, the first thing that's going to happen is you're probably going to have to sign a consent form for an internal York Region employee to look at that assessment and just verify it. So for example, if you brought in a report from a psychologist, so a psychological assessment, our board psychologist would review that and basically determine that yes, they agree with that diagnosis. It seems kind of strange, but believe it or not, there are some people out there who've had licensing issues, that type of thing. So our board wants to just verify that that's an authentic report, that the assessment's valid. And then they would write a consult note saying that yes, they've reviewed the report, and then they would recommend an IPRC with that diagnosis or provide some type of consult note for the student's OSR to indicate that that external report, so a report that wasn't done by a York Region District School Board professional, has been reviewed. And so as a parent, you would have to consent for that to happen. So that's kind of the first piece. Once that's happened, you're going to get connected with a special education resource teacher at the school, a CERT, and they're going to reach out to you to schedule and discuss if you want to have an IPRC. So not all parents choose to go through the identification process. So we do have some parents whose children are diagnosed and that they don't get an IPRC. It's not common, but it does happen. So a conversation with you about, do you want to go through the IPRC process so that we can develop an individual education plan for your child. So usually, so for example, in this school that I work in, if we try and get that done as quickly as we can. So some of our little learners have already been IPRC. They were IPRC'd at the end of September because all of the assessment was in place and we got the forms back in time, and we got the IPRCs done because we don't have IPRCs all the time in schools because you have to get a visiting administrator in to do them. So we usually have them like at the end of September, then we'll have some more at the end of November, then we'll have some, that type of thing. So there'll be kind of a schedule of when the school's planning on having IPRCs in groups, right? But if you passed an assessment to the school board as a parent, you should indicate that you want an IPRC. Right, so you should say, I'm going to share my child's assessment with the school, and I'd like to go through the IPRC process and develop an IEP. So if you share an assessment, so for example, that did happen to me. I shared my son's assessment with the school, and I was like, I want an IPRC, and then I'm like, nobody's calling me back. So then I'm like emailing them. So I was kind of saying, don't forget about me. Like, I gave you an assessment. I want an IPRC. But really the school should be approaching you. There does have to be a clear diagnosis though. So for example, we have a student that came in with a global developmental delay that actually doesn't fall under any of the ministry categories. So that's not a diagnosis that allows us, it doesn't provide us with enough information to have an IPRC. So we would maybe need to do further testing, liaison with the parents around assessment before we can move through the IPRC process. It seemed like a long answer for a short question.
No, that's great.
Okay. Any other questions?
So I think just some people are just the timing of the IPRC for JK and really the classroom placement options for JK. You can speak to that, but my understanding is that there really aren't a lot of options at the JK-SK level. Those two are usually learning years. and children within those years do get different support than at the older grades. So it's a good time to really see how your child learns, how they develop, how the teacher interacts, how they access the curriculum, and develops those social skills. And then grade 1 is where some of those options open up a little bit more.
Yeah, so like I said, you might, some of our kindergarten parents, if they share the assessment right away and they were able to get the consent form back and the psychologist was in the school enough, they might get IPRC'd at the end of September. That might not happen. So we have some other, in my school, we have some JKs that aren't going to get their first IPRC till the end of November, just because we didn't have all the documentation in place. Some of them, we know the parents are telling us they have an assessment, but they haven't found it, and like life is busy, their kids are just starting school, they might not get IPRC to the spring, right? So it just depends on when all of the assessment and paperwork gets completed. In terms of placement options, a lot of our students, because the kindergarten program is actually designed to meet learners where they are, right? So it's designed to support children at entry and meet them with the skills that they bring into the program. Our board does have some community classes though that do start in kindergarten. So we have some students that through early intervention are identified with having a level of need where we feel a community class placement would best service them, right? So they may get offered a community class and start a community class in junior kindergarten. But a lot of our students are getting, especially in JK, in direct service, right? Because the kindergarten program is designed to meet them where they are. Our student support centers, which is a lot of where our partially integrated identification would be, most schools don't even start having kids into their SSC until grade 2. Right, because the kindergarten program is designed to meet kids where they are, and then we offer reading recovery and those types of resources in grade 1. I'm not saying that we don't have some grade 1 students in an SSC, but it's more typical to see kids being in at least grade 2 before they go into an SSC where they might get withdrawal or withdrawal support in grade 2 for math or language, or in partially integrated for both those subjects.
Hi, Karen. Can I just interrupt for a second?
Sure, yeah.
It's Amy Pruchnicki. When my son was in JK, we had our IPRC in October of that year, so we got it in quite early. And I was really disappointed that he didn't get placed in what was called the community room, and we were in Toronto at this time. And it actually ended up being the best thing ever because that room really wasn't appropriate, because it was more for diapering and feeding and really wasn't about learn or play. And once we kind of resigned to the fact, okay, this was where we're placed, it actually ended up being fantastic, just being in the regular kindergarten room so he could learn some basic communication and play and socialization.
For sure, it's such a language-rich environment, the kindergarten program. It's great if kids can experience that, for sure. Any other questions, Heather?
I think that's good, Karen. There's one more, but I think we'll leave it for the end so we can continue.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. I can't advance my stuff. There we go. So in terms of official documentation, you'll get a letter of invitation inviting you to an IPRC. You're going to get that at least 10 days before the date of the IPRC. And you're going to reply that you're attending or not attending, you agree with the placement, that type of thing. You're going to send that back to the school. And then at the IPRC, they're going to do a statement of decision, which is an official piece of paper where you actually say that this is the category of exceptionality, this is the identification, and this is the level of placement. And you're going to have a statement of decision if it's in your initial IPRC. This is the first time your child's ever been IPRC'd. So for some of us, that might be when our child's in kindergarten. For some of us, they might not actually get IPRC'd till grade 5 or grade 10, like it can vary, right? And then every time you have an official sit-down IPRC meeting, you're going to get a statement of decision. However, if your child's not in a community class, because every kid in the community class gets a statement of decision every year, but let's say your child's in grade 2 and they have resource support and everything's going well and you want that resource support to happen again next year, you can get sent home a continuation form saying we want to continue that level of service for next year. But regardless, you're going to either do an official IPRC meeting every year or assign a confirmation of continued IPRC form every year. So your IPRC has to get reviewed every year, because that's the opportunity for you as a family to really talk about the placement. Is it working? Is it too much support? Is it not enough support? That type of thing. And you want that opportunity to really think about, is the level of service that your child's getting, and is their placement really meeting their needs? Okay. So do you have to attend? So I would say I like parents to attend IPRCs because it's an opportunity for you to get to know people, to ask questions. You can talk about that service delivery model, right? So, okay, my child's going to be in withdrawal. What does that really mean, right? Oh, it's going to mean they're going to go to math every period too, that type of thing, right? But if you're really comfortable, because the IPRC meeting isn't a meeting where you talk about placement. In terms of, do I want withdrawal service? You've had those conversations prior to the IPRC. You're going to talk about what that looks like perhaps, but you're not making a decision about level of service or about identification. Those things are all pre-discussed. So if you're really comfortable with all of those things, then, and you agree with the identification and the placement, you're happy with the level of service, you don't need to attend that IPRC. So it's your choice as a parent. If you choose not to go because you feel that you're really happy with everything that's going on, you're seeing the school staff at other times, that type of thing, then you can just sign off on the paperwork. Okay. So in terms of, if you go to your IPRC meeting for the first time, there has to be at least 3 people there, one of which has to be a principal. And if it's for special placements, you're going to have 2 people, and then you're going to have probably a student services coordinator there in our board if it's for a community class. Okay. Other people who can attend, we always want parents to attend. Like I said, students if they're able. So my son attended in grade 8 the IPRC about his high school placement he came to, which was really beneficial for him because he actually met some of the staff that would support him in grade 9 in grade 8 at that IPRC. The teacher, the CERT, other board staff members may attend. Parents can bring someone with them, agency representatives or a support person if that's helpful for them. And at times we need an interpreter there because once again, these are legal documents, so it's really important that families understand what they're signing and agreeing to. So what happens, I've talked a little bit about this, it's not a meeting with surprises. So we've already had a discussion with the special education resource teacher about what's going to happen in that meeting. So really it's just about signing paperwork and discussing what service is going to look like. So people are going to get introduced, they're going to go through the paperwork with you, make sure that you agree with that decision. It's going to be a 10 to 15 minute meeting, usually at most. And you're going to sign off on the placement and the identification. Okay. So it really is about making sure families understand that document and know what the service is going to look like for their child. Okay. So you don't discuss the IEP at the meeting because that's a separate meeting, right? You're going to have a separate opportunity to collaborate on that. You're not going to talk about EA support at that meeting because really the IPRC is about level of support from a special education resource teacher. I'm not saying that's not going to come up, but it's not the purpose of the meeting. That would once again be something you would talk about at a different time. You can't talk about, oh, who's their teacher going to be next year, that type of thing. That's not the time for that. It's really anything that's not specifically related to identification and placement is not talked about at the IPRC meeting. It's really just specifically about that. And usually there's a series of IPRCs happening that morning. So schools will be on a schedule. They might be doing 20 IPRCs in a row. And so you really have your 10 or 15 minutes because there's going to be another parent waiting behind you. Okay. Okay. I can't get it to flip. There. Okay. So once you get an IPRC, so once you have.
I just want to say one thing. There are a couple of questions about disagreeing with any of the identification or placement. What is the proper channel if you don't agree? And I have made it clear, I know in my situation, and I know most of the families I know, there's lots of discussions leading up to that meeting. It really is about 10 minutes and you sign off. You maybe have a couple of minutes to talk to a board member and the principal who you maybe don't always have FaceTime with, so that's a great opportunity. But really the decision making happens before that. You're not going in making the decision.
Right.
So if you disagree with those pre-discussions, what is your course of action? What should you do? Should you still go to that IPRC? Should you postpone it until you come to an agreement? What would you suggest?
So if a letter of invitation comes home and you don't agree with the identification and placement on the letter of invitation, you want to indicate that on the IPRC letter of invitation, and you want to have contact with your school. You don't want to wait, right? So you don't want to show up to the IPRC knowing you don't agree with what's in the letter of invitation, right? So hopefully when you sent that back saying you didn't agree, the school would contact you and say, like, let's chat. But if they didn't, my recommendation is that you pick up the phone and you talk to the special education resource teacher and you say, so we do have parents for sure every year that do that. Even though we've already had chats with them, something happens in their family. Life is busy and dynamic, or they signed something and then they thought about it afterwards and, oh no, that's not really what I wanted. And so the best thing to do is call the school, talk to the special education resource teacher and say, I actually think that my son or my daughter needs more or less support, and have that conversation so that when you go to the IPRC or when they're creating that statement of decision, it reflects what you want. Don't wait until the IPRC meeting if possible, and then never feel pressured to sign a statement of decision. So if you're in an IPRC meeting and you're like, actually, no, that happens very rarely, but you as a parent, as a caregiver, have that right to say, I need more time, or I don't want to do this right now. When my son was in grade 9 going into grade 10, I did not sign his statement of decision because they couldn't articulate to me how service was going to be delivered, and I wasn't satisfied with what was happening, and so we just postponed it. We had some conversations, we worked through some things, and then later on we had the IPRC, and I felt we'd all were now on the same page. Right? But that's unusual, right? Really, we would have hoped, I would have hoped too, that those conversations had already taken place. Okay, does that help? Yeah. Okay, so after the IPRC, what's going to happen is the special education resource teacher is going to coordinate the creation of an individual education plan or an IEP. And the IEP has to be created within 30 school days of the IPRC, of the placement, okay? Or where the placement starts. So you might have your IPRC in the spring for what's going to happen in September, so it'll be 30 days, 30 school days after that. So IEP season is we're in the midst of. Most of I think our board is sending, IEPs home October 15th, right? Because that's about 30 school days after the first day of school, okay? So basically, the IEP is a written plan describing the program for a student, and it's based on an assessment of the student's strengths and needs, and it records and documents the accommodations and modifications they're going to be receiving, as well as any alternative expectations. It's a working document, so it's a living and breathing document that changes over time, and it's also an accountability tool because the IEP is a legally binding document. So if there are accommodations listed in that document, then your child is entitled to receive them. And it's the document that if something is kind of going astray, you don't feel your child's getting those accommodations, that you can bring to a meeting and say, actually, it says right here that my child's entitled to that. So it's a really important document because it can help you advocate for your child. It doesn't want to click there. So IEPs are always developed within the framework of the curriculum. They should be written in a language that parents can understand. Once again, they're 30 school days after their special education program starts. Okay. IEP should always be written by a team. So it is like put in SSNet or written by the CERT, but they're coordinating the document. So it's actually many people should be involved in that document. Parent guardian consultation is mandatory. We would want the classroom teacher to be involved. Students should be involved in their IEP and have a good understanding of that once they're able. So depending on age and a whole bunch of other factors. Also, it could involve administrators, other teachers, support staff, regional staff. Some of our kids have hearing itinerants, for example, they would be supporting potentially with the IEP, and community partners. So it really is a team approach, and it's really important that both students and parents feel that they're part of that team. Okay, how do you collaborate? So many of you, if you've already had an IEP for your child, hopefully you've already gotten a consultation form around an IEP if one's supposed to be coming home soon. Yes, Heather. Oh, so you have, yay, a hand's going up, I've got one. Okay, and collaboration can happen in a variety of ways. Some certs actually phone every parent and do something over the phone. Some people set up meetings. My son in high school now, the consultation form is done over email. Some people send home a paper form. It doesn't matter what that collaboration looks like, it just needs to happen, okay? And then that collaboration should continue throughout the year. The collaboration that happens around the individual education plan is actually documented in the consultation log. So every time parent guardian has conversation with the school about the individual education plan, it should be documented. Okay, and once again, it's focusing on programming and your students' learning profile and supports. Okay.
We found that my son Jaden's teacher last year, who was a special educator for many years, she had some really great strategies that worked that hadn't been sort of written down in great detail because she was doing them already with him. So I actually requested that his cert from this year, because it changed to intermediate, sit down with the teacher, get some ideas from her while we were creating this year's IEP, because she was doing it and sort of automated it so that we wanted it in writing so that we could have the benefit of her experience with my son, what worked for him. And so his old cert and his old teacher collaborated on this year's so that he could have the benefit of their experience with him over actually the last 2 years. So it was a bigger team than usual, but I had requested that because he had such a great year with both of those support people on his team.
Yeah, and you want that to continue over time, for sure. Yeah. So there's a little slide in here of just trying to set up that positive communication with staff, right? I don't know, parents that are, feel free to jump in here, but really at the beginning of the year, you want to be in touch with your special education resource teacher and your classroom teacher and talk about what's the best way to get in touch with you. What's the best way we can communicate with each other? So for example, with my son's cert, best way to get in touch with her is over email, right? For other people, that might not be the best way, right? And then what type of communication are we going to have in terms of going back and forth? So some classroom teachers and certs do daily communication, some do weekly check-ins. Like, how's that going to look like? If you have specific questions, where do you want to go? Really, nobody should be surprised throughout the year if their child's not doing well or struggling. We want that consistent communication. So actually talking about how that's going to work right from the get-go makes things a lot easier. And then if anything important's happening, right? So some of us might have kind of daily communication or weekly communication, but then the expectation being that there's going to be times where maybe bigger issues arise that we need to actually sit and meet. So I don't know if any of our parent people want to jump in just around things that they've done that have worked.
I think Nikki's on there. Nikki.
Yep. Sorry, I was just a little delayed in unmuting myself. Yes, I've used a few different things, and I found that talking to the teacher first is helpful and seeing what would work for them, and also not having an expectation that it was going to be, you know, a novel of information at the end of the day. Let's think about what's really important for me to know. So for my son, it's maybe something that he enjoyed that day, or something, you know, that was new that he tried, just sort of those sort of pieces of information. And then I let them know. I write in the book the next day and let them know how he slept or how he ate and give them a heads up on how he's doing that morning.
Great. So yeah, the needs of your child are going to dictate probably how much communication and how regular you need to communicate with classroom staff. And I think it's important, as you said, just to be realistic, right? If a teacher has 30 students in her class, they're not going to be able to write a paragraph every day, but what's a quick, efficient check-in that can work, or is once a week, email, that type of thing. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so this is just in text, the dialogue for the video. So I'm going to play a little video for you. I'm hoping that it works. Let's see. It's thinking. Here we go.
Yeah, there's no sound on this, Karen.
Oh, okay.
Can you?
Okay. I wonder why there's no sound.
Oh, I just saw something say mute. Maybe in YouTube it's muted.
Unmute. Now, if I play it, could you hear it?
No, maybe try that button again.
Oh, now I'm onto something totally different. I don't even know how to get. Oh, you don't
Okay,
want
maybe
this?
let's look at the slide where he wrote the transcript.
Yeah.
It's so great to hear
Okay.
it from Liam, but I think the message, and I've seen Liam's video a few times, is getting your child involved when they reach a certain age. And Karen, when we did our first presentation together, and my son is now 12, I realized that I was not letting him be a part of it, and you actually inspired me to now go over the IEP with him. So that was
Great,
something
yeah.
that you taught me, that Liam was so involved, and that really helps with that self-advocacy skill. So as my
Great.
son's in grade 7, I really want to help him develop that, and really at any grade they could be involved in some decision making, what they like, what helps them in a certain class, what doesn't help, what's frustrating. All of those discussions with your child are helpful. And I know, Amelia, you had a suggestion on getting your son involved a little bit more in his goals.
So yeah, so the video that we were going to show you was a video of my son when he was in grade 10. And so we've worked really hard with Liam over the years to help him accept himself as a learner and understand he knows he has a learning disability. We've been through his assessment with him, but really helping him understand what works for him and what doesn't work for him in the school system. So do you want me, Heather, to just kind of read what's on the slides? Would that be best?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Great, thank
So
you.
so he says, hello, my name is Liam. I'm in grade 10. I have a learning disability, and I want to talk to you about some things that make it difficult for me to do well at school and about what helps me to be successful at school. So in grade 9, I didn't really know my special education resource teacher, and no one really came into my classes regularly, so I didn't get to know my CERT. I didn't have anyone to get support from that I knew if I was stuck or needed help in my classes, and this was hard. Other things that have been challenges for me are when teachers tell me that I cannot use my computer and when they don't have things in soft copy for me. Also, sometimes when I advocate for what I need, like ask for a digital copy, teachers say no or center me out. Teachers also sometimes get mad at me because I can't sit still for a long time. Another challenge I have is when teachers count spelling and neatness when they are marking and they ignore a lot of my ideas because my work looks messy. Sometimes teachers assume because my work is messy that it's wrong or that I'm not trying. Luckily, there are lots of things that help me do well at school. When I get copies of my assignments online and when my teachers have a Google Classroom and let me use my computer, I do better. This year, I also have a CERT that I know and who comes into my classes. I know I can check in with her and that she will do her best to help me if I need anything. She asks me about my interests and has made an effort to get to know who I am. Another thing that helps me is having the option to write my tests and exams in a quiet spot like the resource room and being able to have extra time if I need it. It also really helps when the assignments my teachers give me are interesting and when I have some choices about what to do. Being able to get feedback early when I start assignments so I know I'm on the right track is also really helpful. When I get feedback early, I know I'm on the right track and understand the instruction and what the teacher wants. With the right resources, I can be really successful. So my son filmed this when he was in grade 10. And well, I don't know, I'll just leave it there and I'll talk a little bit about it. And that was years of work for me as a parent and for us as a family, for him to get to a place where, first of all, he would talk openly about the fact that he had a learning disability, but also that he himself could identify what strategies worked for him. And it was a lot of time and effort for him to do trial and error of accommodations, right? So I would put a strategy in place, or his teachers would, and it wouldn't work, right? So it took a lot of learning for him to actually say, these things actually help me, these things don't. And it was also great for him to be able to articulate what were barriers for him in the school system and what really helped. You know, as he articulated, having a safe person in school that he knew was his advocate and his ally and was an adult in the building was critical for him. But he's now at a place where he can actually go to people and say, this is what I need to be successful. So he has a voice in his IEP. And so when we talk about collaboration, over time, it's really important that we build that voice, because now that my son's in grade 12, believe it or not, he doesn't want me going to the school. Like, so we have to get our kids to a place where they can articulate what works for them. And then with my son, he still runs into barriers, like it's not perfect, but he now knows that he has a person that he can go to if he doesn't feel comfortable. So he's had instances at school where people have been like, no, you can't use your computer. And well, it says right in his IEP he can. So either, depending on his relationship with the teacher, he knows he can ask for that. So he'll say, actually, my IEP says I can. Or he'll go to his CERT and say, so-and-so's not letting me use my computer. What should I do? And she'll help him work that out. So it's been a journey that I think really, as soon as you feel as soon as you're comfortable as a parent, and as soon as you think your child's ready, you want to involve them in this process, because as much as we think we're always going to be there, we're not always going to be there. But also it's very empowering for them to know what works for them, to know what makes them be successful, and for them to be able to, in that environment, advocate for what they need. Right? So
I want to tell you a little story that happened this week. I'm trying to teach my son Jaden to be a little bit more proactive and organized in remembering assessments and quizzes, because he missed a science one on Monday that he didn't know about, and she never told him. And of course it was posted in Google Classroom, and he's just not great at checking that. It's one more place and a few steps. It's not great for him. So I have this CERT happen to call me this week and talk about setting up a time to talk. And I said, well, I think maybe an agenda would be good for him. I think maybe writing it out would be really helpful. So she was so fast. She went to the office. She emailed me back saying, I already got him one, and I'm going to put it in his room. I'm going to go take it and deliver it to him. Well, he was mortified that he was going to have an agenda in grade 7 because they didn't order them for any intermediate students. So I completely messed up as a mom and as his advocate. And I did not ask him first. And the CERT called me saying he had this look on his face like, you're not giving me that agenda. And she absolutely respected that. He said that, and she said, listen, dude, this is not a big problem. Let's find a strategy that works. And they talked about it, and he's now going to take pictures on his phone of the homework board.
Yeah, so that's great.
Assessments and share it with me every day. So I made, the biggest mistake not to talk to him about it first, and the CERT just happened to be way too fast.
But it worked out.
But I made a pretty big mistake, and when he came home, I said, I'm sorry. You're right. You have a voice. You should have picked the strategy that works. Let's figure this out together, so that because you were upset you didn't know about that test and might not have done well. So let's find a strategy so you're on top of it. So it was, yeah, I learned that lesson this week.
Well, and the first time when I went through the accommodations on my son's IEP with him, I'm like, wow, that's a great one. And he was like, that doesn't help me at all. I was like, oh, I thought that sounded really good. But he's like, no, that doesn't make it easier for me. This makes it easier for me. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. Because I think
we don't know everything.
Yeah. Sorry, could I just jump in about getting your child involved, especially the people here that have the young JKs, I totally advocate for getting your child involved, and it's really been the last couple of years that I've set yearly goals with him and communicated it to the school. And even though your child might not understand, some of the terminology of disabled or special need and why they need to be accommodated for, they don't need to know if you're not ready and they're not ready to talk about it, but there still is ways to get them involved without saying, well, you're special and this is what we're doing. You can just really say, like, this is, important to be successful at school, and, what can we do, and what do you think you need, or what are the goals that you want, even at a very young age, to get them involved. And it doesn't have to be these big, scary, ideas and concepts. I think if you start early, it gets much easier. And I'm like Heather, I just started advocating for him to be included in this goal creation just really the last year or so.
Great. So it's just something to think about in the back of your mind in terms of the journey, because you know, as much as when my son was making that video, you only got to see a little bit, I was like, oh my gosh, take your hat off, you're talking too fast with the camera. I had to resist all those parent pieces and just be proud of the fact that he was actually able to talk about some things that worked for him, because that didn't happen overnight. Right? We'll just skip now, and just in terms of what are the major components of an individual education plan. So they're up here on our screen, so that when the individual education plan comes home to you, all IEPs are going to have a section on student information, sources consulted, accommodations, a transition plan, and a consultation log. And then some IEPs are going to have a safety plan and special program pages. And we're just going to go through all of these today, just so that you know kind of key look-fors on those pages when that, because if either in the future when your child has an individual education plan, or one might be coming home to you in the next few weeks. Okay, so student information is just going to be all the personal information about your child. And the most important part of this section is when it talks about the courses that your child's taking and what the program type is. Because the program type is whether it's accommodated, modified, or alternative. And that's critical information, and we're going to talk about what those things mean. So you just want to really make sure that that is correct. And when we go through what those means, that'll make more sense, okay? The human resources section, also another key section, because it outlines type and frequency of service. So the frequency, so this was from my son's, and it has semester 1 and semester 2 because he was in high school. So if you're in elementary, it would look a little different because it would be for the whole year. But really, in terms of the frequency, so my son was identified as resource support, but the frequency actually tells me how often that resource teacher is coming into his classroom. So she's coming in 1 period per week, right? And that's important to know as a parent, because I think my experience, especially with parents whose children are just starting school, so they're in kindergarten, grade 1, they're like, oh, resource support, he's going to see the cert every day. That's probably not what's going to happen. It might be what's happening, but you just want to have that understanding really clearly, so that you're not thinking that your child's actually getting to see the special education teacher every day they're coming into their classroom, when in fact it's only once a week, just so that you have that understanding, okay? And it's going to align with the IPRC. So what was on the last page, that human resources section. So if we look, if I can get this, no, it's not going to go backwards. But basically that identification that's listed on that human resources section comes from the statement of decision. It shouldn't be different, okay? Okay. Then there's a sources consulted section, and really that's where all the assessment reports are listed, medical diagnoses, if there's any current achievement testing. And so the report that gave your child the diagnosis should always be on this page, but then really it should just be relevant assessment data that people are using to help them inform programming. So for example, sometimes I'll look at a child's IEP and they're in grade 6, and when they were in JK, they had an ARTIC assessment for like speech, and it's totally irrelevant to their programming now, then it doesn't need to be on the consulted page, right? It's what's current and relevant, okay? And you're going to see strengths and needs. Strengths and needs should come from assessment reports. So this can often be confusing for parents, because when you get the consultation form sent home, you know your child has lots of other strengths. Maybe they're like super artistic, maybe they're really athletic. That's really not what this is about. This is about, from a cognitive profile standpoint, from a learning standpoint, what are the strengths and needs listed in their assessment? And so that's where these come from, okay? So you're gonna see things, if you look, like this would, once again, these are probably my sons. Executive function, that's one of the things that's listed in his psych report as him needing support with. So that's why it would be there, okay? So then you're going to have an accommodation sections, and these are those kind of special strategies that help kids reach their potential and demonstrate their learning. So they do not alter curriculum, right? They're just things that enable them to access the curriculum and reach their potential, okay? So they don't alter the grade level or the number of expectations or anything, okay? And this is why it's important when we go think back to that first page about program type. There are many students that only receive accommodations, right? So they'll have an accommodations page and they're doing all the regular curriculum for the grade, but they're getting accommodations to enable them to reach the potential and do their best with that curriculum. So accommodations are in 3 categories: instructional, environmental, and assessment, and that there should be an alignment between the instructional accommodations and the assessment ones. So for example, if I was teaching a student and when I was teaching them, I let them use technology, or I gave them extra time, or I highlighted key instructions, I wouldn't then when I was assessing them say, oh, sorry, I'm not going to do that for you. That wouldn't make sense, right? If they need something during instruction, they need it during assessment. And they should be specific and beyond good teaching. And they would change over time. So the things that a child in JK would need in year 1 kindergarten, those accommodations are going to look really different potentially when they're in grade 3, when they're in grade 6, when they're in grade 9. So every year it's really important that you look at this page, because it shouldn't just be a photocopy of last year, right? Sometimes it might be because it makes sense, but our kids change and grow, and their understanding of what works for them, their skills change, so they can access different types of accommodations. So these should be changing over time, okay? And they should be specific. So I always say less is more, right? So we don't want 25 accommodations. We want like maybe 6 or 7 instructional accommodations that really work and are really effective. I gave a little example just of how to make them specific. So rather than just saying chunking, which means like breaking things apart, I would want to talk about how I'm chunking, right? So for some students, I might put less on a page. I might give them parts of the assessment at different times. So there's many ways to chunk, and we want to be specific on the accommodation so that all of their teachers, because as our kids get older, they have prep coverage teachers, they go on Rotary, everyone should be able to understand what that accommodation means so that it's consistently provided for your child. Okay. Oh, it's not letting me click. It's getting stuck. There we go. They all also have a transition plan. So all students who have an individual education plan now have a transition plan. And it lists actions and strategies to support transition goals with timelines and who's responsible for that. So the transition plan isn't about skill teaching. It's about strategies to support transition, whereas other pages might be about teaching a child skills. This is more about strategies or resources they need to access to get them to manage a major transition. And this is going to change over time. So, for example, if a child's in year 2 kindergarten and they have a transition, their transition plan might be about transitioning to grade 1, because grade 1 looks really different, right? And what are we going to do in junior in senior kindergarten, year 2 kindergarten, to help them manage that big transition into grade 1? And in grade 1, it might just be their transition plan might be about adjusting to the grade 1 environment and transitioning to an environment where there's more independence. They have to go to different areas of the school. They have different teachers, that type of thing. And then some of our students are going to have program pages, and program pages are when they require modifications to the program. So let's say a child is in grade 4, but they're reading at a grade 2 level or grade 1 level. We would be modifying that program and working from a different year and providing expectations from a different year. Or we would be reducing the number of expectations they would be working on. Okay, so that's when we would have program pages. Or they might be working on alternative expectations. And alternative expectations might mean that we do have some kids who aren't on our kindergarten program yet. So they're working on skills before that. We have students who are working on eye gaze, joint attention, things like that. That's where their learning needs are. And we want to create program pages to meet them there. So they might have a communication page, for example. We also might have alternative expectations around things like social skills and self-regulation, very important skills that connect kind of to our learning skills if we think about a report card, but they're not centered in the provincial like math curriculum or language curriculum, but social skills and self-regulation are important skills, so we might have alternative expectations around that. Any questions, Heather, just around that? We good? Okay. So once again, what are modifications? Because this is really critical. If you're getting modified programming for your child, someone should have talked to you. Okay, so your child shouldn't be getting modifications if no one's talked to you about it, okay? Because it's a big deal. So when your child's getting modifications, it means that they're making changes to grade level expectations for the subject, okay? So they're either taking expectations from a different grade level, or they're increasing or decreasing, they're the complexity of the expectation or the number of them, okay? So that's a big deal. Whereas if they're just getting accommodations, they're working on the grade level curriculum, but they're maybe getting extra time, they're getting tasks broken apart, they're getting to use assistive technology, but they're actually meeting the curriculum expectations for that grade and that subject. When a child's got a program page for, let's say, number sense in mathematics, that tells me as a parent that they're not working on the same curriculum as their peers in the regular classroom. Does that make sense? So my child's in grade 3, he has a program page for number sense. That means he's not doing the same thing as the other kids in grade 3 in number sense. So he's either taking expectations from different grade levels, so maybe grade 1, grade 2, maybe some from grade 3, or he's working on simpler concepts. Okay, so it's really important that as a parent, you know what's being modified for your child, okay?
I also want to just add to that my son, there are certain units in his math that he can be at grade level.
Yes.
And there's other units where he does have to be modified to a grade below.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been really great that his CERT has been able to recognize areas of strength and be able to assess him and give him the work at grade level to kind of work him up to that level going into high school. But, you know, there were many years where he was about 2 years behind, but right now some of those units have caught up as he gets a little bit stronger in those math skills.
Right, and really all of our kids have different strengths and needs. So your child might need a modified program in writing, but in oral communication, that might be a real strength for them. So then they don't need an oral communication page. So we don't want all of the language strands to be modified if they don't need be, or all of the math strands to be modified if they don't need be. So I think that's where you can have a lot of conversations with the teacher and the CERT around where are your child's areas of strength and how are they represented in the IEP. And we don't want to modify for a child if they don't need it, right? So it's important. So I talked a little bit about the alternative expectations already. So once again, they're not derived from the curriculum. So they're either things that are outside the curriculum, like social skills or self-reg, or skills before the kindergarten curriculum. Okay. So some kids might have a personal care page, for example, because they're working on those skills. That would be an alternative expectation page. Some kids might have a self-regulation page. That would be an alternative expectation page.
And Karen, I can add to that. So my son Joseph, he had most of his was alternative, and obviously getting ready for high school and him being in puberty, you know, one of his alternative goals last year was to, you know, independently brush his teeth at the sink and put on deodorant, because he didn't need the deodorant last year, but he's going to need it this year. And, you know, and that was something he did every day. It was a daily task they did in the afternoon every day for 15 minutes. He would, you know, brush his teeth independently, wash his hands, wash his face, and put on his deodorant. And that, you know, and that's very helpful for me, obviously, as the parent as well, to have that as, you know, something he's learning throughout the day at school.
For sure, and it's important that we're tracking that progress and that attainment of skills, so that next year his teacher can look at that and say, oh, he's already mastered those skills. What can we work on this year, right? So we want to make sure that we're documenting that in the IEP, because we want that program to continue and for the next year's teacher to know what skills they've acquired, for sure. Yeah. So some IEPs can be 25 pages long. Some IEPs are going to be 5 pages long. So there's lots of variance depending on the needs of the child. Okay? And I would say if you have a child and they're getting ends in learning skills, okay, once they get into grade 1, that's a red flag that they probably need some program pages and things like social skills or self-regulation, right? Because we don't want to keep giving them ends and saying that they're not meeting expectation in those learning skills. We want to take a step back and say, what skills can we work on collaboratively to teach them to bring those skills forward, right? Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration with the IEP next. Okay. So parents, jump in because you've got lots of experience here. So obviously when the one thing that everyone I would hope has in common that's supporting a child is that they want kids to do well, right? I would say most educators that I know want kids to be successful at school, right? So that's always something that we would have in common. Our families want their kids to be successful in school. So that's always a starting point. So we know that that's a common goal, but we always want to find those common goals. We want to make sure that we have a homeschool communication system that includes positive feedback. So we always want to be getting positive communication about, every parent wants that. I don't want to hear every day all the things my kid did wrong. I need some positive feedback. What's my kid doing well? So that should be incorporated into your communication system as well as next steps. There's nothing worse as a parent than just getting negative feedback with nothing good being said about your child or no solutions or plans for next step. Great, you're just telling me all the things my child did wrong. That's actually not that super helpful. What are we doing about it, and how are we using their strengths to help build skill, right? We want to foster student voice. We talked a little bit about that because that will help build communication. Kids are really good at helping us communicate with their teachers, right? Because if they're talking, if they're part of that equation, we're finding out what's happening at school and so on, right? So we want to help them understand their learning profile. Your child really needs a safe person at the school that they can access and that they trust. They actually say your child should have 3 people in their school environment that they can count on as safe people. And so it's really important as a parent to think about who are those people for my child, and how do I foster those relationships, but also who's my go-to person as a parent. I don't want 5 different people from the school calling me. I'll be really honest. I want kind of know who's my go-to when something's going astray, and who do I feel comfortable advocating as well. But if your child doesn't have a safe person, it's problematic. So it's something you want to talk to the school about is who are we fostering positive relationship with your child in that building. And ideally, as I said, we want it to be more than one person. I see kids all the time that only have one person, and then that person's away, for example, and they have a really tough day at school. So we really want to build that. You want to work on advocacy skills with your child. You want to take advantage of times to meet with the school and get to know people. And you need to understand kind of that process of who to talk to when challenges occur, and we'll walk through that process together. Do our parents want to jump in? Things that have worked for them?
Yeah, I've always got a lot to say about this. I can't express enough how important it is to build healthy relationships with those special people, those 3 key people, the safe people for your child. And it's so important to have patience and understanding that there are some, multiple priorities that everyone has. And I think just like if you are sitting at work and, your boss wants something and then the other boss from the other team wants something, that's going to happen. And it's really important to have patience and be realistic about what solutions can come out. And I guess kind of have an open mind and kind of be creative in solutions. So something you might not think would work, definitely give it a try. Because so many times I'm like, I know my child best. I know what should happen. And the school has come up with some great solutions because they have great experience. And until I actually tried it, I was like, whoa, they actually know what they're talking about. And I just needed to be a little more humble and really take the advice. And I think the last thing I want to say is really have, one eye on the day-to-day, making sure that there is great collaboration and, that advocating is happening, but also, have an eye on the future and realize that, the landscape of the work environment changes fast. And what we thought was really important for our kids' education and being quote unquote successful is really changing as technology changes. And just because they're, being accommodated or modified in math doesn't mean they can't have a great career that in something that's numbers. Or same with communication, they might not have great social or communication skills, but the way technology is changing, that you really have an opportunity to still have a great career in those, regardless of what happens during the school years.
Great, super.
It's my key to collaboration and to really the success at my school. I have an older son who also went through that school and was a perfect student, never needed any help at all. So this was all new to me when I had my younger son, and he was assessed and we started to have those struggles. I had already been a really established and involved parent in the school. I helped volunteer at movie nights. I helped at the carnival. I went to parent council. I knew my school vice principal and principal by first name. They knew me. I had a really nice relationship with them, and it doesn't mean that you have to volunteer and it's a, you know, a give and take in time and favors, but it's really nice to have a relationship that's beyond just even your child. Like, I laugh with my, you know, my principal at the carnival when we're watching a teacher get the pie in the face, and all of these moments where you're talking to them and letting them get to know you too has helped me immensely when I've had to go and talk about a struggle. It also means that we know each other well enough that I can go into her and say, oh, someone dropped the ball. You know, this didn't happen on time. Jaden was left with, you know, so-and-so or something happening. Can we figure out a solution? And she already knows me enough, and we will find that solution together. And it's been a really, really an awesome way to collaborate as a team. My son has a new teacher whom I've never met, but I sent her an email at the beginning of the year saying, can't wait to meet you. Jaden's really happy to be in your class. I'm excited for a year. He seems, you know, really eager to learn, which is something exciting for me. And, you know, can we set up a time to talk beyond a meet the teacher night? Because that is not the right time to get the attention that you need. But we actually are going to meet with her on Friday. And, you know, I just sent her a message saying he's really happy. It's off to a great start. Looking forward to working with you together so that we have a successful year. And she was really thrilled to have that, you know, discussion with me. And then something happened the next day that I had to go and ask her, kind of a not contentious issue, but something that happened. And it, you know, we already had that dialogue. So we already started that rapport, and it just made that conversation so much more positive.
And I think that I know one of the things that was a big learning piece for me was when my son transitioned to high school. I don't know what I was thinking, but I made this assumption that, you know, people were going to read his OSR, and, you know, they were going to look at all his documents, and then everyone was going to, I don't know what I was thinking. And what I needed to do was contact every one of his teachers, connect with them either by phone or set up a meeting and say, like, my child has an IEP. I'd really like to come in and talk to you about it. You know, these are the things that help him. I kind of was like, I'll just wait and see how things go. No, I don't know what I was doing. I needed to do just that and reach out, set up a meeting, so that right away there was an understanding of what his strengths and needs were, and we set up that communication. Because then when things started to fall off the rails, I didn't know these people, right? And also I was disappointed, and I could have avoided all of that by just going right in and saying, like, let's talk. My child has an individual education plan. I want to go through with you. Or my child's had an assessment, and I'd like to talk to you about some things my child's really good at and some challenges my child might have, right? So I do think, don't do what I did and wait and hope it works out. Yeah. Okay, we'll try and, I think we're almost running out of time here, so we'll go through just the last couple slides here. This is just a slide about successful meetings. So obviously we want our meetings to be child-centered and focused on their best interest. We really want to try and make sure that we understand the child's strengths and needs and everyone's perception of that. I really liked, like Heather was talking about, all idea of being solution focused, right? When we go to a meeting, we want to come out of the meeting with a solution. And sometimes we can get caught up in talking about all the things that maybe went astray. What really we want to do is make sure we leave that meeting with some solutions and an action plan for moving forward. And I know just from working in the school system, teachers have limited time to attend meetings. So if we aren't solution focused, we cannot get to the action plan and the meeting can be over. So I just want to caution parents about that we really want to make sure that we don't lose our time in the agenda to action plan. And really we want to try and always be trying to understand everyone's point of view. We want to share responsibilities. And to really take time to express some things that are going well, what do we appreciate, and then, like I said, really making sure we have time for that. What's the action plan, right? I've been in meetings, especially as a consultant. Nobody wants to be in a 3-hour meeting or a 2-hour meeting because people stop being productive after that amount of time. But we might also have like a really limited time. We only have 35 minutes because that's when the teacher's been released. And you know, it's minute 34 and we haven't actually made any next steps yet, which is frustrating for everybody involved, right?
I think the other thing I would say for meetings, something I always do is follow up with an email. So that after that meeting, I thank everyone for their time. And then I put like action items, like here's what I'm going to do. Here's what my son's going to do. Here's, you know, what the teacher's going to do. Here's the next time we're going to meet. And I put some deadlines and dates, you know, in a really collaborative, professional way, certainly not dictating it, but really just making sure we're all on the same page, that we all left that meeting having some action items that we were all responsible for. And then also just knowing, when are we going to assess this? Because there's been times where I haven't been, you know, I've been open-minded to some of the suggestions and said, okay, let's try it. You know, they're experts. I'm expert on my child, but they're experts in education. So I've said, okay, let's give it a try, but let's try 3 months and then let's discuss it again and we'll find out how that went. And, you know, that's been really helpful too, having those deadlines. And most of the time I've moved it forward and we've continued on, but I needed to feel comfortable knowing that there was a deadline and a time where I could change my mind and have an out just in case it didn't work.
Yeah, I think if I can jump in for a sec, some of the things I found the most helpful during the school meetings for Brody would be, one, especially if there's a lot going on, just making a list, just a jot list of the things I really want to cover, to make sure it keeps me on track so I don't get sidetracked. And also, when listening and working with the team, really listening to understand what it is they're saying and why, instead of listening to respond. Sometimes when we're already thinking there's issues going on or we're anxious, instead of really listening for what they're saying, we just want to get our point out. So really taking that extra second and listening to what they're saying and trying to understand their perspective before I'm, you know, coming back with my perspective on it.
Okay, then here's some tips that were developed just in terms of for effective communication. So participating in your school community, pointing out the positive, asking specific questions, not having super long emails, and the 24-hour rule is always good. Sometimes there's been times where I'm like, it's a good thing I didn't send the email that I wanted to send at midnight. All right, I needed some time to breathe, right? And just taking that time to not have that kind of, I call it my mother bear response, where I'm just like, oh, and just giving myself some time from that, making sure you're setting a good example for your child and choosing your battles. And I know that when I've gone into really big meetings for my son, I have done exactly that in terms of writing down some points I don't want to forget, because sometimes too, I'm not quite sure in a meeting who's setting the agenda. Like as a parent, I'm like, so I asked for this meeting, but the school seems to already have the agenda prepared. I'm like, but I have things I want to say, right? So making it clear at the beginning of the meeting that these are the things that I want to discuss so that they're on that agenda, if that makes sense. Because sometimes when parents ask for a meeting, the school kind of might speculate on what they think that meeting's about. And it's really important that as a parent, you put what you want to discuss on the table.
Yeah, Karen, can I just add that you attract more flies with honey? And sometimes a well-placed and well-timed box of Timbits sometimes goes a long way.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think I've been sort of messaging some other questions in the group that we could answer, but I just want to reiterate that so many of you haven't even entered the school system yet. And by understanding some of these things, it just helps with that open communication when you're empowered with knowledge about some of the guidelines. And these are ministry guidelines. And while they might differ a little bit from board to board, they also differ from school to school. And so some of my answers to all of you have been, you know, I can't tell you what a community class looks like because they're all entirely different. So I know many of you are working with early intervention and will have some visits to schools. Sometimes it's not your home school that's the best fit. Sometimes it is another school. That was a possibility for my son as well. And, you know, I think that one of the things that I've learned is just being open-minded and also working with our families. You know, I've met, I can't even tell you how many families who said, I only want my child in the mainstream classroom. And then a couple of years later, they're in a community class and they've said to me, why didn't I do this sooner? My child is thriving. This is exactly what they needed to access the curriculum. They're with peers. They're getting the attention they needed. The sensory issues have changed because it's a smaller classroom, fewer people. And then likewise, you know, I know families who only wanted a community class, tried integration, and that was where their child was successful. So, you know, I've met some amazing families who have been so open-minded and worked well with the school board and with their own child and been open-minded enough to say, let's try it. You know, if this is what's being recommended, maybe we can try it. And again, nothing is written in stone. Things can change. Community classes can change every single year even. So even if you haven't decided to do that for your, you know, for grade 4, the makeup of the class typically changes every year when there are different children, even teacher changes. So what might not have worked in grade 4 might be a better fit for your child in grade 5, if that's an option for your child to be successful. So I think my next one would be being open-minded helps that communication as well. I think we've addressed every question. We're almost at the end. Are there any last questions from anybody or any last tips? I know you have a last slide on sort of the sequence, and this is really when, you know, that open-mindedness can be great, that great communication can be fabulous, but sometimes there's some barriers to getting what we think is going to be best for our children. And so here, Karen, if you can just explain sort of what that process might look like.
So there is actually a consultation sequence, and it's the ministry actually recommends it in their shared solutions guide. And it talks about when you have a concern with your child at school, who do you talk to first? So we always are going to start with our teacher, our special education resource teacher. That's going to be our first line of defense type of thing. We're going to talk to them first. And then if we were still feeling that the issue wasn't resolved, we would talk to, in the elementary level, the vice principal or the principal. After that, if we were still not feeling the issue was resolved, we would go to the student services coordinator and then the superintendent of education. The reason that this is important is that if you jump the line, they're going to bounce you back, right? So if I was having an issue with my son at school and I immediately called the superintendent, the first thing the superintendent is going to ask me is, did you talk to the teacher? Did you talk to the principal? And they're going to bounce me back there. Because it'd almost be like if you were at work and there was a problem and someone went way up, instead of talking to you about the issue as your colleague, they went and they talked to your boss's boss's boss about you. You'd be ticked off, right? It's just not the way it works. So it's similar in education, and in the secondary level, there's just that extra step of the department head. So just being aware that, and the other thing that I always did, because I'm going to be honest, I've had to deal with the superintendent with some issues that we had with my son. I actually said to the principal, I'm letting you know I'm going to be contacting the superintendent because I'm still not sure that we're on the same page here or that there's still some underlying issues. So I've always been really transparent when I've been going up that chain. A few other resources that are just here. So this is the guide that was put out by the ministry. It's called Special Education in Ontario. It was put out in 2017. It combined a whole bunch of previously standalone special education documents that were written by the ministry into one big document. If you have a question about something, this is the document that you would want to look in. It's available online. So if you had a question about the IEP process, the IPRC process, like you name it, it's in this book. So they took a lot of previous resources and made it into one. So that's available for you online. This is the shared solutions document that I was talking about. It just talks about how to come when you're having potentially some discord. What are some ways to build collaboration and overcome that? And then each board is going to have resources for parents. They're going to have one on the individual education plan, one just on communication, and one on the IPRC process. Our board has them available. I think the IPRC one's in like 17 languages, so it's been translated for families. So these would be available. Each school board would have these resources available for parents. They should be coming home to you through the IPRC process. You should get the IPRC guide. You should get the IEP guide when your IEP comes home. And they just kind of outline and review those things for you, so that you kind of understand what your rights are, what you're entitled to.
We've also, when I sent the reminder for tonight, we also sent the links to our resources on the CTN website, and all of these are included in that. We've also included the Teachers Federation, where there's amazing ideas for strategies, IEP accommodations. We love that website, and you can actually search it by your child's needs, like executive functioning, or you can search for it by diagnosis, which is really awesome. So I've sent the link, it's in the chat. I also sent it in the email today, and I'll send it tomorrow when I resend our email with the survey. I've also put the survey link in the chat room. It takes literally 1 minute to do it, and it helps us secure funding for future workshops. It also helps us sort of help us plan for future workshops. What are some of the other topics you'd like to learn about? We'd love to hear from you. So if you can take a couple of minutes, I'll send it to you and bug you again tomorrow. And we will also have a recording of this webinar that you can share. You can watch again, you can take some notes. And we'll send that usually by the time we edit it and post it on our YouTube channel. It'll be out next week, and I'll send it to everybody that's participated, and even the ones who couldn't make it tonight, but who had RSVP'd. So if there are no further questions, and I don't see any, we had some great ones during the talk that hopefully I answered. And I wanted to thank Nikki and Amy and Patty for helping us out and providing that parent perspective. All of us, the four of us, have such different experience, but so many commonalities too, which I think is pretty cool when it comes to school, and just some of the ways that we've been positive. And had, success for our children. And Karen, I can't thank you enough. Having you, I love our little road show, and I would, and I hope people ask us, because I think it's a really awesome collaboration to have your expertise and your experience as a parent, and with our experience as parents. And it's a pretty awesome presentation to share with others about what we know, and some tips for as they enter the school system. And hopefully it's exciting, and you're feeling excited, prepared, and maybe even positive about what that experience is going to mean for your child, because that's what it should be for all of us. So thank you, Karen, very much.
No problem. It's always fun. I always learn something and love meeting new people. So it's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Karen. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Have a great night, and you'll see me in your inbox tomorrow. And if you can take time for that survey, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.